It's an honor to present to you the Transportation Omnibus Bill. And before we get started, we always like to take a minute to say our thank yous to those that helped us put the bill together, understand the policy, run the committees. And so with a very sincere appreciation to Mr. Burris, House Fiscal Research, and Mr. Lee, Mr. Burris, House Research, and Mr. Lee, House Fiscal Analyst. They're probably in the alcove. I can't see them, but we appreciate their knowledge that they guide us through just drafting bills in committee, their professionalism, their patience, and really their dedication. We're lucky to have this pair of researchers in our committee for, I think, about 10 years, and it's really helped us to do good work in transportation. I also want to say our thank you to our committee members. We had on our side no freshmen, but a couple new people on the committee. On the other side, we had a few new people. So we appreciate the work, showing up for committee and being prepared. Chair Cagle, I want to thank you for your co-leadership on the committee, and it hasn't been easy, but I think we've got a good product today that we'll be going over and proud to support. Our DFL staff, Mr. Kyle Straub and Mr. Bauman, thank you for your help and guidance and professionalism as we went through the process. And then, of course, our entire GOP team, especially my legislative assistant, the committee legislative assistant, Cindy Whalen, kept us amazing support and kept us organized and ready to go on our committee days and putting this bill together and keeping all our meetings organized. So thank you, Cindy. And we also had our researcher, Mr. Justin Brill, who did a great job keeping our committee prepared and understanding the work in front of us. And then finally, the magnificent Mr. Joe Marble has been a good mentor to me and walking us through my years of transportation. But thanks for the Diet Cokes, the laughs, and the wisdom and the good counsel to help us put together a great bill. Members, stakeholders that are watching, this is a balanced bill. Obviously, we have a divided, balanced legislature, and this bill reflects that. This transportation bill makes our transportation system smarter, it makes our transportation system safer, and it also makes our transportation system more sustainable, both environmentally and fiscally. The bill prioritizes the types of transportation that Minnesotans use most and reinvest in roads, bridges, and all modes of transportation to drive the economic development of our state. And recognizing a few fiscal realities that we all are facing, Minnesota can be proud of the work reflected in this bill. Working with the zero target, we didn't get any new general fund money. We had to reallocate the dollars, and we are also, of course, facing a $6 billion deficit. And so we had to dig a little bit deeper into the numbers to do some great work with a zero target. And to start off, we're pulling the plug on some failed projects to save taxpayers millions of dollars, and then reinvesting those dollars into better and safer roads and bridges. We're investing in our bus rapid transit, our airports, and other systems of transportation. This bill holds general fund spending steady, but reprioritizes how other funds are used. Savings are redirected towards road construction, maintenance, and common sense transportation programs that boost our economic development and improve safety. The impact of a $6 billion deficit, we know that the capacity for the Capital Investment Committee, or the bonding bill, has been reduced with the looming deficit. The reallocations and investments in this bill for construction-ready projects take over $100 million of pressure off that Capital Investment Committee and the demands on that committee that now they can have more room for other critical needs across the state, critical water and local infrastructure projects. Trunk highway projects could easily eat up the $700 million bonding maximum capacity authority, And so by reallocating a lot of the funds in transportation that we currently have, we are moving Minnesota forward with projects, but also taking that pressure off of our bonding ability. So this is a responsible, a balanced bill that reflects the priorities and values of Minnesotans across the state. There are about 16 GOP provisions and 14 DFL provisions, plus, for the governor that's watching, plus most of the governor and department's recommendations. And I kind of hesitate to go through some of the project lists, but it's important that you know what's in the bill. We have, to start off, just to go through some in the appropriations, in the Duluth area, we are funding an air traffic control tower that's badly needed and in disrepair, so we will make our air safer. Representative Cagle has a corridors of commerce efficiency recognition of running MnDOT more efficiently, and we're putting those dollars in the corridors of commerce program. Representative Kraft is going to make our streets safer with his DWI and interlock provisions that we'll talk about later. There's an empowering small cities programs to help smaller communities utilize more grant programs and do more planning. There's a long-awaited local road wetland replacement program that's going to make that program more sustainable with ongoing funding and allow us to build roads more sustainable. There is local projects in the bill that will make it safer in communities throughout Minnesota, both DFL and Republican areas. And we will talk a little bit later about an important bridge at the University of Minnesota, and I'm glad that we will be putting some resolution to this project and making that safer for students and pedestrians. Representative Tabke introduced the MnDOT policy agency provisions that are included. Representative Cagle has a project portal and reporting to make tracking projects easier on the MnDOT website. We will talk about making our roads safer and more sustainable with the greenhouse gas emission assessment and changing the implementation date of that date. Representative Kraft and Zalesnikar and others have introduced legislation for electric vehicle surcharges that electric vehicle drivers will pay a commensurate amount to our road systems for the use of that. Transportation is generally derived by user fees, and so this kind of makes an equal amount with the electric vehicles compared to gas consumption, gas tax. We are directing our local partners, counties and cities, and the Met Council to use transportation investment dollars that the state gives them to any fee income will be required to remain in that pool of transportation dollars that was originally provided while those funds are waiting to be used for projects. Representative Olson has a few different dealer and license plate provisions to make it easier and smarter and safer to purchase vehicles, and when you purchase vehicles, the plates on them, he'll talk about those a little bit later. Representative Joy helps the road system with the blackout plates that people are purchasing and putting some of those funds into the Highway User Trust Distribution System. Representative West helps out our motor vehicle rental plates. When our guests come to Minnesota and they need a rental car, they will have a little bit easier, smarter time of renting a vehicle and making sure that those tabs and registrations are paid. Representative Anderson has a provision for our salvaged titles on vehicles that are inoperable, and we need to get the title back to the insurance company or the salvage yard that has the vehicle in possession and has paid out the owner. Representative Davids and Olson had some clarifications on the retail delivery fee for construction materials and heating fuel, propane delivery. And so we appreciate that that is now been clarified to the original intent of the retail delivery fee. Representative Schwartz has a provision for transporting crude soybean oil that will make it safer for trucks to be delivering the soybean oil to the plant. It's a small provision, but it's an important provision that makes it safer in that area for truckers and motoring public. Representative Joy again has a provision for our commercial truck drivers to schedule their test. Representative Myers will talk about the challenges in scheduling a road test for our younger, generally our younger drivers, so that hopefully we can free up some of the testing times that I know can be very frustrating for parents. Representative Cagle helps make our transportation system smarter by the way we build and invest in our roads and maintain and monitor our road systems with both a pavement asset sustainability ratio targets and also a resilient pavement program that we are initiating that has great bipartisan support, in addition to some consolidated reporting aids. There are Met Council regional transit capital bonds for our transit system, over $100 million, so that our trains can continue to operate and get new trains and put new buses, tires on the buses. When the buses age out, purchase new buses. Those are kind of standard bonds that are included in this bill. There's some Representative Olson has another provision for traffic safety violations report extension at the University of Minnesota that will be coming out in a number of months, but they needed a few more months to finish that report. Representative Murphy makes it easier and safer and a smarter way for those with loss of consciousness and to continue to have their license without having to go to the doctor to get their exemptions. Representative Engen's area in the Circle Pines area will have a full-service deputy registrar's office, and that will make our roads smarter and transportation system much easier to use. So members, I will kind of pause at that and turn it over to Chair Cagle for some additional comments. But again, this is a balanced bill that reflects the values of Minnesota, and it makes our system smarter, safer, and more sustainable. With that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over back to you for recognize Chair Cagle.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So yeah, this bill isn't, it's one of those things that everybody kind of is upset about. So, but I want to just hit a little bit of the highlights here. With the recent string of airport issues, we wanted to make sure that we got some funding for that Duluth Air Tower to make sure that, Minnesotans flying in and out are safe. We did have to reduce the appropriation to Greater Minnesota Transit, but we were able to do that above what the governor's recommendation was, as well as protecting passenger rail for this biennium. We got some money, about $650 million to the Blatnick Bridge, and a one-time appropriation to Corridors of Commerce of about $30 million for the biennium. We also were able to get some money into the Transportation Economic Development, about $30 million for the biennium, and the Resiliency Pavement Program as well. We were able to fund that at $50 million. Some of the other highlights, we were able to get 3.8 to both local road program and local bridge program. Our transit operating for Met Council, again, that was a cut that the governor recommended, and we were able to come in under that cut. So it was $40 million this year and then 64 in the planning years. Other things in here. One of the big things that that we had talked about on our side of the aisle is about the 2023 budget and how transformational it was. And so really my goal was to go in there and protect as much as we could of Chair Hordenstein's legacy. And so one of the things that I was really proud of is that we were able to protect Metro Mobility from cuts. And I thought of Representative Hicks every time we talked about that. We were under the cuts for Greater Minnesota Transit and Metro Transit. We protected passenger rail. We also protected safe routes to schools. We were able to refine the delivery fee, so it actually met the intention of what the bill was last year. We were able to protect the active transportation funding. We also were able to include all the extensions from previous services or previous grants, including Reconnect Rondo, grants to MPOs for greenhouse gas reduction, and Highway to Habitat. We were also able to get the e-rebate reform for the e-bikes. And so now it will be income-based lottery and much easier for people to try and access this time around. We were also able to get some traffic calming safety grants to the city of Minneapolis. But the biggest thing is that we were able to protect Hennepin County's decision on Blue Line and also on NLX. And so, I'm really hoping that we can have a good debate here today, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hanson R. moves to amend House File Number 2438, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A31.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hanson R., who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A31 amendment relates to the Washington Avenue Bridge. It provides for a different funding source than what was in the bill. There are two different funds relating to Hennepin County. This provides it, moves that to a more appropriate fund. In addition, we did have a preliminary draft fiscal note that showed that the cost would be $9 million, so it reduces the appropriation from 15 to 9. I want to thank Representative Cagle and Representative Kosnick for their support on this and ask for your support as well. The Washington Avenue Bridge has been a magnet, unfortunately, for people committing suicide in our state, and has been for over 60 years. And so we're hopeful, we've talked about this for several years, hopeful that this will get the job done and we can prevent those tragedies from occurring again. I'd ask for your support.
Discussion to the amendment. Representative Kosnick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Hanson, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I know it was an emotional bill for one of your constituents whose family member, daughter, jumped off the bridge and left her family behind. So I'm proud to have this provision in here, and I think it's being paid for an appropriate pool of money. So I encourage a green vote on this amendment.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The amendment prevails and is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Myers moves to amend House File Number 2438, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A24.
I recognize Representative Myers, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, first time sitting on the Transportation Committee, and one of those mutual things that is important to everybody is safety. Safety for drivers, transit, pedestrians, and that also includes cyclists, including e-bike safety. So what this amendment does, it mirrors the helmet laws that we see for mopeds, that we see for motorcycles, and will require anybody under the age of 18 riding an e-bike to wear a helmet. You know, locally elected leaders in my community, from Excelsior to Shorewood to other communities like Minnetonka, Edina, Chanhassen, and Chaska, are supportive of approaches like this. I spoke with Carver County Sheriff, who supports it, as well as my own police chief at Southlake. The purpose of this is to provide some clarity for our local communities, as well as the safety of riders. We know some of these bikes can go as fast as 30 miles an hour, and I think we're all trying to move in the right direction towards zero deaths in our transportation system. A recent study detailed that helmets reduce the risk of brain injuries by up to 85%, and I know some of those statistics are important for members here. You know, this is all about the ability to enjoy safe and accessible transportation, as well as supporting our communities, and again, moving towards those opportunities and goals towards zero death. But after talking to several of my Democratic colleagues, I thought we were, I had the impression that there was going to be bipartisan support for this. But I saw that there is an amendment to the amendment on this. This is a little frustrating, a little disappointing, because again, I think we all have a common approach here to safety. And our cities, the ones that I named there that impact several of our districts, are looking for action. They're not looking for another study. Out of respect for the work that both Chair Koznick and Chair Cagle did, I will withdraw this amendment.
Representative Myers withdraws his amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Kraft moves to amend House Law number 2438, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A22.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So, Chair Koznick, I heard you saying how this bill improves safety and sustainability. So I bring an amendment here that will do that even more. Yes. So what my amendment does would remove a 3.5-year delay in a great law we have in place already that reduces road congestion and saves lives. In 2023, we passed this law, and it went into effect February 1st of this year, almost 3 months ago. The bill language right now would stop the law and put in place a 3.5-year delay until August of 2028. One of the things that this law is based on is the concept of induced demand. So this is a little bit counterintuitive, so I'm going to explain. What the data has shown over the years is that adding lanes doesn't reduce congestion. And there's lots of data on this, but there's a really excellent study done from 1993 to 2017. You're on the wrong amendment. 826, right? 822. Pardon me. 822. Never mind. Pardon me. I thought that was, I had been indicated. Okay, 822. Sorry. Well, so you have a preview. Okay. First, on the 822, I'd like to request a roll call, Madam Speaker.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Kraft.
Okay. My apologies to members. So I'm hoping this will be viewed as a friendly amendment, as it gives us the chance to back away from what is a pretty huge and unfair increase in EV annual registration taxes. Currently, they are $75 per year, and the proposal right now in the bill is for a 167% tax increase to $200. This amendment aims to find some compromise and would set them at a far more reasonable $100. So I believe behind this proposed increase to $200 is a concern that EV owners aren't paying their fair share of road upkeep expenses because they don't pay the gas tax. But if you actually look at the higher upfront sales tax that EVs pay because they cost more generally than equivalent fossil fuel vehicles, and the existing $75 annual registration fee surcharge, there's a very strong argument that EVs already pay more than their fair share. And let me be specific on this $75 annual registration fee. If you look at the average miles driven by Minnesotans, it's 13,957 according to a 2022 study from the Department of Transportation. So if you think about the gas tax, you pay less if you drive less, and you pay less if you have a fuel-efficient vehicle. So today, the gas tax is 31.8 cents per gallon, right? Now, if you drive a car that's 40 miles per gallon, which is a pretty fuel-efficient vehicle, that's $111 a year. If you drive a vehicle that's 50 miles per gallon, let's say a Prius, that's $89 a year. Now, an EV is at least as energy efficient as those. And the other thing about EVs is if you look at how many miles per year they're driven, the average tends to be much less than the average of a fossil fuel-based vehicle. So really, just looking at this, I don't know how we can justify $200, especially as we already have a higher sales tax rate than our neighbors. So with this amendment, what I'm aiming to do is give us all a chance to be more reasonable here, move it to $100, which is still a bump. It does add inflation indexing to that, so it matches the gas tax perspective, so fairness. And then the other thing it does is the current language has a split between money going to the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund and to a Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Fund. It adjusts that a little bit, make sure that the amount going to the Highway User Tax Fund is held constant. So that's what the amendment does. I said I think it's for much more fairness, and I encourage a green vote.
Discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've had a handout just distributed that kind of reiterates the points that Representative Kraft just made. If we were to raise our EV surcharge to $200, it would put us tied for third place of all of the states in the country right now. It would be an extreme outlier. And as Representative Kraft pointed out, in the second page, the page 9 of the handout, it shows on average from a study how many miles on average per year various types of EVs are driven. And we're at a point where why should someone who drives a Nissan Leaf 6,500 miles a year be penalized by paying an EV surcharge of $200 that's based on the cost of driving an F-150 pickup for 13,000 miles a year, or why should Representative Reimer pay $50 more a year in transportation gas taxes just because his pickup truck is run on electricity rather than gasoline? So I strongly support a vote in favor of this amendment.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member, Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's encouraging to see our friends across the aisle suddenly get some tax insight and want to lower taxes and have concerns about being an outlier. I wish that would transpire into all areas of taxation. But the fact is, members, is that transportation is based on user fees, and Minnesotans want EV drivers to pay a commensurate amount, a similar amount of gas tax that regular drivers pay. EV cars are heavier and also produce more wear and tear on our roads. And this provision is supported by a number of stakeholders and advocates. With all the virtual signaling of driving an EV, I'm sure even former Representative Pat Garofalo would be happy with this provision. So members, I encourage you a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, if we want EV owners to pay their commensurate amount, then we really need to vote for this amendment. I've taken you through the calculations I mean, this is way more than what a equivalent fossil fuel vehicle will pay. And if we want to talk about weight and get into what the weight and how that, I mean, there are many large pickup trucks, minivans, things like that, that may cause more wear and tear on roads than a small compact vehicle, and we don't go down that path there. So I think that doesn't make sense. But really, just the basic math here, folks, is that voting for this amendment is a much more reasonable approach, and I would ask for a green vote.
The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Hussein.
Okay, go ahead. Say it one more time.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye.
Thank you.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, the amendment does not pass. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Kraft moves to amend House File Number 2438, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A26.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll explain it again, I guess. Members, so as I mentioned, this law will improve safety and sustainability on our roads, removes a 3.5-year, this amendment would remove a 3.5-year delay in a great law we have in place. One of the concepts the law is based on is induced demand, and I was about to explain it. And what this induced demand is it's a recognition with the data that we've seen is that when you add lanes, it doesn't reduce congestion over a number of years. What happens is that more car trips happen, and then within a few years you have more congestion than you had in the past, more pollution, and the system works worse. And you don't have to take my word for it. There was a study done from 1993 to 2017 of 100 metro areas around the country. And in those areas, population grew by 32%. The number of lane miles grew by 42%. So more lane miles per unit of population. So if that was a solution that worked, you would expect to see congestion go down. But in that same time period, congestion grew by 144%. So what this law that we're putting a delay in is doing is making sure we take that into account as we expand our transportation system. So that as we expand it, we're also decreasing the average amount people need to drive to live their lives, or vehicle miles traveled. And I mean, who wants to spend more time in congestion in their cars, right? So this is why we need to accept this amendment. Interestingly, if we can do this and reduce the average amount people need to drive, there are all kinds of other benefits. Huge cost savings for Minnesotans, as well as fewer people dying on our roads. So in a Rocky Mountain Institute study, it said that using this law to help MnDOT achieve its vehicle miles traveled goals would save $91 billion by 2050. Some recent data indicates that could be quite conservative and would save 65 lives per year and prevent 1,000 injuries. So why would we give up these benefits? This is systemic change that we're trying to make, to think differently about our transportation system. So we think about how to get people access to the things they need to live their lives versus just thinking about cars. And with systemic change, the system fights back, whether it realizes it or not. It says things like, oh, this isn't quite ready. And that's what we're hearing. But it is ready. Perhaps there's another reason some are ready to give up on these benefits is because some of the other benefits here of this law are climate change related. In fact, we get the congestion and life-saving benefits I talked about because we have focused on reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So, if you care about climate change on this, a change in this law is indefensible. Transportation is our #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota and the country. Passenger vehicles are the lion's share of this amount. Minnesota has a goal already in statute to reduce emissions to zero by 2050. In committee, the commissioner of MnDOT, Commissioner Daubenberger, said delaying this law would remove the most significant tool that MnDOT has in addressing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the reason it's so important is reducing greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles really requires two things. One is electrification in fuels, making that more efficient and reduced greenhouse gas content, and miles driven. Now, so I ask for a green vote on this amendment. As I said, yes, it's about greenhouse gas emissions, that's how we started, but really it's about our transportation system doing a better job at helping people to get where they want to go with less congestion, with less of an impact on people's health, in a way that saves them money, and in a way where fewer people are killed. Please vote green. Oh yeah, I'd also like to ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. So the concept that this program is ready right now is absolutely incorrect. The law came into effect on the 1st of February, and they still had no real knowledge of how they were going to implement this. The first draft has just come out with the idea of how we're going to be doing this program, and it's not February 1st. That was the first draft. If you look, you'll see that the second draft used to have a projected date of July on it, but they've since taken that projected date off because maybe they need even more time than that. Now, members, what we are currently working on is a concept that if we started this requirement on the 1st, and we have no knowledge of how we're going to get it done even today and potentially into July, because this current draft says nothing about how we're going to mitigate these greenhouse gas emissions. It says nothing of who coordinates the mitigation. It says nothing about who pays for the offsets. It doesn't have the information that is necessary. When you don't have a plan, but you're required to have a plan, you need to delay said program if you have no plan. What this means is that currently we have no plan for any of these road construction projects because we can't have a plan. So what you're doing right now, by delaying this program into the future, you are giving time to individuals who are creating these drafts, creating these guided lines for how we are going to move forward with this. Now, the statement that this delay is going to make Minnesota roads less safe is an absolute farce. I fought for 2 years trying to include in the current legislation, the way it's currently written, a carve-out for safety. If the department thinks we need to do these programs in order to make people safe, then we should be able to do it. And every time I came up against an argument that no, the department should have no ability to claim the usage of safety as a way to make these projects happen without mitigating these costs. Members, the concept that it is more safe to require a program to begin today, which isn't ready for prime time, is unsafe. That's a problem. We cannot do it. Now, when you talk about the actual costs, now we heard a lot of things that are theoretical savings. We heard into the future, we're going to save countless dollars from a Rocky Mountain Institute study that was done prior to the pandemic and doesn't actually allocate or even recognize the significant reductions in vehicle miles traveled that have occurred as a result of the post-pandemic era. It doesn't take any of that into account. But what we're seeing is that we cannot move this forward in a direction and take theoretical savings, this idea that's thrown out there. I can create a study today that says anything. Oh, we're going to save copious amounts of money if we just do this. That's what they're doing. The actual costs are plain as day. If you are going to require the department to mitigate carbon emissions without a real plan as to how to get it done, we will see these projects balloon in costs significantly. We don't even have a real example because we have no guidelines, we have no equations, the math isn't possible because we don't know what the numbers are. We actually don't even know like a squared plus b squared because the formula is not written. It's not there. We don't have a formula. But if we did have a formula, we are looking at having to increase costs to mitigate these carbon emissions by building things like bike trails. And one of the hypotheticals that we're looking at is that if we were to require the carbon mitigation on the interchange in Jordan, there's a current project that's happening. It doesn't have to be mitigated because it made it before the February 1st idea. But if we were to mitigate that, they're looking at a requirement of building a bike path to offset the emissions to the length of from Minneapolis to Fargo. A bike path from Minneapolis to Fargo, the length of that would be required to mitigate the carbon emissions that are created through adding a lane or creating an interchange. Members, this is hypothetical stuff that is not baked in the cake yet. We don't know what we're doing. And the reasonable and the responsible thing to do is to delay something that you don't know how to act upon it. And that's all we're doing here. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're not ending it. We're not saying that this is not a real thing. We're saying we are not really ready to do this yet, and we need more time. Members, I would ask that you would vote no on this amendment to remove it because the state of Minnesota is not ready for this yet. Someday it may be ready for it, but today it's not ready. Vote no.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And one thing that when I was on the Transportation Committee, when this greenhouse gas emission bill came up, it was very important to me because most of my time here is spent trying to get money for Highway 65. Complete disaster in the district. And I have heard from Democrats on the Blaine City Council, Democrats on the Anoka County Board, who are saying, please address this issue. We need to build Highway 65. And this is the #1 barrier after money of redoing Highway 65. We got a little over $200 million to rebuild a good section of Highway 65 through bipartisan cooperation, and significant thanks to Chair Cagle on acquiring that money for Highway 65, but there is more work to do. And so many members here I know have very important road projects in their district. This greenhouse gas emission will slow those projects down unless we delay it. The offsets don't make sense, as Representative Olson already pointed out. So please, members, this is something that we need to delay. We're not there yet. We're not ready for flying cars. Everybody doesn't have an EV. We're not ready for teleportation. This is a provision that is way too far ahead of its time. We need to make sure that we can build the roads that our community needs. And we have bipartisan agreement on that, at least in Blaine. So I would encourage members to vote no on this amendment because this delay is the least we can do to make sure that Highway 65 doesn't have more barriers into acquiring the funding to finish it, so we don't have to sit and rot and just waste a lot of our lives sitting at 109th or 99th or 93rd or Highway 10 on Highway 65. So members, this is a great bill that was negotiated with bipartisan agreement. I would encourage you to vote no on this amendment.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the representative from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I specifically want to call out Representative Kraft. One thing I've come to appreciate about you is your willingness to craft a logical argument. And you've done that. The problem is some of the premises and the assumptions. And if this vote goes down the way it seems like it's going to, I want to try to offer you some comfort, okay? So if we delay this thing, the assumption that you seem to be working on, one of them, is that transportation in a few years from now is going to look exactly the same as it does today. And I got to tell you, things are changing incredibly rapidly. The types of technological advances we've seen in recent years with AI, with electric vehicles, the things that are being developed. And if you want to get a firsthand view of it, the next time former Representative Pat Garofalo is around the Capitol, flag him down and he will be eager to take you for a ride in his new toy, which is an EV that has the ability to literally drive itself. It's astounding. It has a display on it. It shows you vehicles all around you, because these vehicles have cameras all over the place, shows you pedestrians in real time as they're walking, and it takes all of that into account and recognizes traffic lights, recognizes stop signs. And currently, it's set up in such a way that the vehicle actually requires you to supervise it. So the internal cab camera makes sure that you're actually paying attention. This summer, they're coming out with an unsupervised mode where you can just take a nap if you want, and the car will just drive itself. We're going to get to the point in short order where it will be feasible to not even have to own a car. Imagine that. To have a subscription service where the car just comes to you when you need it, and you can decide what model you want for whatever the need is. You take in the family someplace far away, that's going to require a certain type of vehicle. You're commuting here to the Capitol, maybe you just need a one-seater, right? Who knows how funny they'll start looking when we get to this point. But the encouragement that I want to offer you is that what you're trying to affect, which is a cleaner environment and reductions in greenhouse emissions, the market is innovating, and we're getting there. It doesn't have to be as a result of a government mandate. It can be as a result of market innovation, and I hope that'll be some comfort to you. Thank you.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker and members. Representative Kraft, I anticipated that we'd have some discussion about the greenhouse gas mitigation offsets today. And, we do recognize the need to be conscious on how we affect the environment. But the reality is that there is still important questions on implementing these offsets, and a 12-month change in the implementation date just gives stakeholders time to get the questions and the issues worked out. And additionally, members, according to MnDOT, we have a funding gap in just maintaining our current system. If you were in committee, you saw this slide. It's on their website, of the funding gap report. And in it, the gap of maintaining our roads is over $1.1 billion a year, members. We are short $1.1 billion a year in just maintaining our road system. And that funding gap is exacerbated with increased costs to projects. And that's what the big concern is. The mitigation offsets, according to MnDOT, increase project costs between 5 to 30%. We had testimony from county engineers, city engineers, and other stakeholders that suggest it might be even closer to 40% of an increase in maintaining and building projects. And this is a huge concern. The reason this 12-month change in implementation date is so important is because it gives stakeholders an opportunity, and those that are designing the offsets, the technical advisory committee, gives them an opportunity to answer some questions and fully figure out how to even implement it. MnDOT hasn't fully finished implementing this, so stakeholders can figure out how they need to adjust their programs and products, and there are a lot of questions involved. Representative Hudson brought up the futuristic nature of transportation and how that may change the transportation systems and its effect on the environment and congestion. But currently, there are still questions about who coordinates the mitigation if it involves non-transportation offsets or crosses multiple jurisdictions. If Representative West in Anoka County is trying to do a project and he needs to do some offsets, what if it crosses the jurisdiction into Scott County or Hennepin County, and how do they coordinate that? Those questions are not asked or answered yet. And also, who pays for these offsets, and how are we going to pay for them when we already have a $1.1 billion funding gap? And what if the true cost of the mitigation exceeds the estimates as we're trying to plan this out? What do we do then? We don't have an answer on that yet. And members, that's why this change in the implementation date by 12 months is so important. You were on your desk giving a letter from a variety of the stakeholders that participated in the committee and testified to the importance of a simple change in the implementation date. And so, members, we cannot accept this amendment. We are trying to work conscientiously, and I mentioned that we're trying to, in this bill, have safer, smarter, and more sustainable transportation system. And when we don't have the questions answered, it's not smart to proceed forward. We want to make sure that, as Representative Olson mentioned, that if safety is a factor, maybe we should have that considered in the offsets, if the safety of a project. But when we talk about sustainability, the first thing you might think of is environmental sustainability, and that's important. But we also cannot crank up the cost of projects and burden our system between 5 and 40%. That's not financially sustainable or feasible. So, members, we cannot accept this amendment, and we need to have more work done before we can implement this policy. So I urge you to vote against the amendment.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of Representative Kraft's amendment today. Just want to make sure that we are all recognizing, we've heard a lot from GOP members about delay and about pushing this forward into the future and how that will impact our transportation system. And then we heard from Representative Hudson about the future is now in transportation and where we're going with things. And I also want to reiterate the fact that right now, our country is on fire due to climate change. Canada has been on fire due to climate change. We are having so many issues with climate change. Minnesota is one of the largest states impacted in the United States on climate change, and transportation is the #1 sector for greenhouse gas emissions. And so this is one of the biggest places where we can make changes and where we can move on how we are impacted and what the future looks like for transportation and climate change here in our state. Last session, I was honored to sit on the Commerce Committee. And in Commerce, we talked a lot about insurance. And so everyone across the spectrum of political ideologies recognizes and understands that insurance is rising, from car insurance, home insurance, all the different things, because of, and not any other issue, #1 issue and reason why we are having to spend more every single day on insurance is because of climate change in the state of Minnesota. And transportation, again, is the #1 impact on greenhouse gases, an emitter of greenhouse gases in our state. And so this greenhouse gas emissions legislation that we passed in 2023 will, into the future, have big impacts on how that will. It's not today, but we must start today in making sure that we are getting this work done. So I very much support this amendment and hope we're able to pass it. Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really pleased that some members across the aisle brought up the idea of fiscal responsibility, because I think the GHG VMT law actually gets at that. And I want to provide an example of my namesake highway in Katy, Texas. So it's in Katy, Texas. It's called the Katy Freeway. Actually in Houston, Texas, apologies, to provide this example. So, 20 years ago, it was the second worst bottleneck highway in the country. It had 11 hours of congestion each day, and it was so bad they decided to increase the capacity of that highway to 23 lanes at a staggering cost of $2.8 billion. So of course, yeah, that brought down congestion. You know how long it took for that congestion to come back? 3 years. $2.8 billion, and it didn't solve the problem. Induced demand is a real thing. We can't just build our way out of congestion. In this law, the VMT portion of it specifically helps us to actually evaluate projects to make sure that we're not going to be inducing demand in a way that is going to make our investments worthless at the end of the day. So, induced demand is real. This example is just one from across the country. I'm sure we have them here in Minnesota too, but I'm going to be voting green on this amendment, and I hope that for fiscal responsibility and for sustainability, you will join me. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I was just kind of struck by something I heard, and I knew this already, but we have the 4th largest road system in the country, but yet we're not a very big state. We don't have the population of a lot of these states. So the question is, why do we have the 4th largest system? And if we don't have enough money to maintain the 4th largest system, why would we be adding more? That's what we're talking about here. It has, one of the things that I've talked about a lot in the past few years is multi-layer benefits. Guess what this does? It has multi-layer benefits. It makes it so that we're addressing climate change, that we're making sure that people get outside and can walk around their communities. I have a Cub grocery store just down the street from me, but not a sidewalk in front of my house where I feel safe walking to Cub with my daughter or my family. So this is multi-beneficial systems where we can think about how we're planning these communities. Think about our roads. Are they necessary for this specific project? Is there a better way that we can do things? If there's an intersection and there's an accident there every month and then we have the chance to change it, we just don't build the same thing, right? We want to address some of these issues. And when we talk about this is a safety issue. We want to make sure that we are living healthy lives. We want to get people outside walking, biking, but also having a healthy life and also having better air quality and water to drink. That's right. So I don't understand why we would vote in opposition to this. It's a multi-beneficial way of addressing the 4th largest road system in the country. The #1 emitter of greenhouse gas emissions is the transportation sector. And we want to make sure that our kids have a healthy environment to live in. Right now, we're not really given much of a earth for them to stand on once we're gone. So if you care at all about the future, about saving money, about having nice, livable communities, vote yes.
Representative Koznick.
Thank you for the discussion, members. I would just a couple points that sometimes we're not even adding capacity and the projects could potentially fall under some of these offsets. In the overall bill, we do establish a greenhouse gas mitigation account. However, it's going to be woefully inadequate for the increased cost of this, and part of that new revenue is based on the electric vehicle charges that we just discussed earlier. And it was interesting to hear a couple of the comments by people that helped negotiate putting in this 12-month changing the implementation date. And one of the things that we do have to recognize is the diversity of this state. Not everybody, but only half, live in the 7-county metro area, and within that 7-county metro area, there's a variety of size of cities. There's actually some small cities, and not just cities of the first class. When you look at the system that we've built in Minnesota, it helps us to get people from regional center to regional center, from Mankato to St. Cloud, from St. Cloud to Duluth, from Duluth to Fergus Falls, to Alexandria. And so that's one of the reasons we have the network that we do, because Minnesotans want to go visit each other. We have beautiful resources in different parts of the state, and we need to maintain the system that gets people there to enjoy that. I'm going to make an attempt for Representative Mueller here from last week's discussion, thinking about this, and I think sometimes people just don't like highways. And there's a song called "The Highway Don't Care." It's Tim McGraw and a little bit of Taylor Swift. And so Tim McGraw sings, "The highway won't hold you tonight. The highway don't know you're alive. The highway don't care if you're alone. The highway won't dry your tears. The highway don't need you here. The highway don't care if you're coming home." And so some people might not like the highways because the highway don't care. The highway don't care. But in the end of the song, Representative Mueller and Taylor Swift fans, she recognizes, "I can't live without you. I can't live without you, baby. I can't live without you." Members, we can't live without our highway system in Minnesota. Taylor Swift recognizes that, and I hope that you will recognize that and vote no on this amendment.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Koznick. I almost said Representative Swift, but yeah. So, you know, one amendment I thought about bringing was amendment asking the Earth to pause climate change for the same amount of time we were pausing this law. But I figured that probably would be ruled not germane. You know, I sense how this is going, but I'm going to try again to rebut some of the things that were said. This is a systemic change, and many of the things we've heard this afternoon are the system, you know, fighting back. Representative Hudson, thank you for trying to provide me some comfort. And you know, I like this vision of transportation being differently. You know, auto-driving vehicles have some really interesting things that can result in. But you know what? If those come into being, we will need less lanes and less highways. So if you think that is the case, then you should be voting green on this amendment. This amendment is not about looking backwards. See, I did pretty well, right? This amendment is not about looking backwards. This amendment is about thinking reasonably about our transportation infrastructure and not looking backwards and thinking only about just cars. You know, Representative Koznick and Olson, so both of you, I would ask you to do a bit more homework in some of the statements that you made. Representative Olson, you know, you mentioned that this Rocky Mountain Institute study was pre-COVID. That's not actually true. It was 2023. You said the assessment procedure is not ready. It is ready. And you said there were no math in there. There's quite a bit of math in there. MnDOT is clear that it is ready. The Technical Advisory Committee has posted this. You also talked about some project would require mitigation of a bike path to Fargo. Well, I mean, I guess if that were the only mitigation option, that could be an argument. But there are 9 mitigation options, and there are others that can be added by the Technical Advisory Committee. I mean, you know, this is about planning projects differently. So you wouldn't plan that project with a bike lane to Fargo, but you would plan it differently to move people most effectively and not just vehicles. Chair Koznick, you mentioned a few things that I need to address. You said 12-month delay. That is not what's proposed here. This law is in effect as of February 1st, 2025. What's in the bill right now is to delay it to August 1st of 2028. So by my math, that's pretty clearly 3.5 years. MnDOT, this is ready to be implemented. And you also talked about, this can affect all kinds of projects. This is for substantially sized projects, more than $5 million in greater Minnesota and more than $15 million in the metro area. We should not do this. We should accept the amendment. We should not do this. Certainly from a climate perspective, the Earth doesn't care if the Earth isn't going to pause. But again, this is also about our transportation system doing a better job at helping people get to where they need to go with less congestion, less of an impact on people's health, in a way that saves a lot of money. Cars cost a lot of money. So does death, by the way. On that, there was a discussion about safety. We have been doing this kind of mitigation for, I think, about 30 years with wetlands mitigation. Wetlands mitigation right now, if a road is going to impact wetlands, and then that impact must be offset. There's no exception if it's related to safety, because you know why? Because we can do both. We can protect wetlands, we can make roads safer in the short term, and we can save lives in the long term and do the right thing by our kids and grandkids. Please vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Hussein.
Go ahead. Say it one more time.
Hussein, yes.
Hussein votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, the amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Jones moves to amend House Bill number 2438, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A38.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jones, who will report the will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to call for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this amendment makes sure that Greater Minnesota Transit is kept whole. I was happy to hear Representative Koznick talk about the diversity of this state, and I agree that there are lots of different people in this state and they need different ways to get around. So I want to talk first about what is Greater Minnesota Transit. Well, it's three main things. It's 30 county and multi-county rural transit service systems. This is the kind of dial-a-ride service that you may have heard about. It's also 7 small urban transit systems for cities between 250 and 50,000 people. They have a route deviation service. That means there's kind of 2 planned terminal ends. There may be some intermediary stops, and the bus generally goes along, or vehicle generally goes around that route, but a passenger can request a little bit of a deviation along that route. And then there's the large transit systems for cities 50 to 200,000 people with that traditional fixed route transit. And these provide 7.4 million rides in 2023. These are trips to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, to school, to work, and to visit family and friends. So I want to address three main reasons for why this is needed. First, the sheer number of people who need access. Nearly 1 in 3 people in this state doesn't drive for one reason or another, whether it's age, ability, affordability, or choice. This also includes 1 in 5 seniors. And Greater Minnesota has a greater proportion of people over age 65 than the metro. So people, whether they're age 8 or 80, they need to be able to get around. Second is fairness. I bring this amendment because residents of Greater Minnesota deserve transportation options just as residents of the metro do. And we hear again and again that rural residents feel left behind. So cutting transit service certainly doesn't help with that. So that's why I'm bringing this amendment. We also hear that there's a worker shortage in Greater Minnesota. So it's a problem when workers can't get to their jobs. Rural residents need to get to school and get to the store. And if they can't get to the store, they're not spending money in supporting local businesses. Residents also don't deserve to be stuck at home. We hear and read about the problem of loneliness throughout this country. Increased loneliness also correlates, unfortunately, with increased deaths. And according to the Rural Health Info by the Department of Health and Human Services, people in rural areas are almost twice as likely to commit suicide than those in urban areas. And lastly, safety. So I actually come from a rural small town which doesn't have transit. And a high school classmate of mine, his name is Brett, he made poor decisions, which, by driving while intoxicated. The DWIs resulted in his license being revoked. And so he's like, well, how am I supposed to get to work? Well, he made another poor choice of driving without a license, because what other choice did he have? When people like Brett make mistakes, why don't we create environments for them to rehab and succeed, to do the things we want them to do, which is go to work and be productive members of our society? But as I understand it, there have been over 5,000 instances of people driving without a license. That's not safe. Do we want people with recent DWI pasts trapped in the same way without a way to get around and tempted to drive when they shouldn't? Greater Minnesota Transit, though, can help. This amendment is about safety. It's about caring for rural residents, particularly our seniors, and ensuring fairness of access in rural communities. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I urge a green vote, of course.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize Representative Koznick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And a concern about this, I would encourage members not to vote for this amendment. There is concern on, make sure we got the right one here for a second. Shoot. Yeah, it's not a good amendment anyways, but we carefully went through the budget, the whole spreadsheets that you were emailed earlier, and the reductions and reallocations that were made in this budget were not easily decisions that came easily to us, but it does recognize the change in transit patterns and transit needs, and we repurposed a lot of investments into the modes that people use the most. The governor's recommendation was significantly deeper than the reallocations that we made in this bill. The governor of Minnesota had different, deeper reallocations than what we had in this bill. And the reason for that is because of the reserves and the base funding that's already in transportation and transit for Greater Minnesota Transit. And so while I appreciate the stories and the effort, we need to make sure that our resources are being used in the modes that people use the most. And there are significant reserves for Greater Minnesota Transit already, and that's why the governor recommended even more significant reductions to the base funding. And we only did a portion of that. If we would have taken all of that, we could have done other projects that more people use. So members, I encourage you to not vote green for the Jones Amendment, but I appreciated looking out for Greater Minnesota Transit, but it misses the mark.
Recognize a member from Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The author of the amendment just stated that the purpose of her amendment is to make sure Greater Minnesota Transit is kept whole. Well, I don't like to play the game of going around the room asking members to yield and try and catch them with a gotcha, so I've got some information, and you can make the determination on your own as to whether or not Greater Minnesota Transit is being kept whole with the current proposal. So for those of you who are unaware, this current fund that we have right now that ended in fiscal year 2024, it ended with a positive surplus of $47,682,000 in it. So Greater Minnesota Transit had, at the end of 2024, $47,682,000 in it. It started the year at $70 million. So you started the year at 70, got some base funding, still at 47. There was a slight discrepancy there, okay? Now we move into the future. So right now, almost $50 million in reserves, unallocated, ready to go, sitting there. And the question is, are we using this as a savings account, or are we trying to responsibly utilize transportation dollars? That's the real question here. Because after we insert the base funding into this projection, we're going to have $117 million in this account. That's the base funding. The base funding is $117 million in this fund. So the question is, should we have taken the governor's recommendations, which was a significantly larger reduction than what we agreed to, or should we, this amendment just adds $4 million. It's $4.3 million, somewhere around there. So we got $117 million going in for the base funding. We could add $4 million more, and then it'd be $121 million. But do we really need that? Is that a responsible utilization of transportation dollars? And I think that the work that went through this negotiation is an appropriate utilization of those dollars. But if that's not enough to vote this amendment down, members, and I appreciate the author attempting to look out for the guys from the small town, that's where I'm from. I was born and raised in a small town. I actually live a mile away from the hospital that I was born in, so I haven't gotten very far in my life. But with that being said, the last portion of this amendment, where we're going to take the Maple Grove project, there's a bridge in Maple Grove that got hit by a truck, and we're using, in this bill, we're using general fund dollars to fix it, and the amendment asks us to use trunk highway funds. Now, I reached out to the department and I said, hey, does this project qualify for those funds? Can we use those funds? And the answer was, we would have to ask the city of Maple Grove a lot more questions to see if it actually qualifies. So what I'm assuming here is that we here, with the creation of this amendment, are assuming a lot of things. Now, my assumption is that we can't wait until MnDOT determines that they're going to make this bridge fix, because they're not currently planning on fixing this bridge until 2027 if we don't do something about it today. So currently, that bridge, it's a problem that needs to be fixed. And we could gamble, we could gamble with the second part of this amendment and say, well, maybe it'll qualify, and if not, then we'll just not make it happen, or we can just throw that out and throw the beginning out because it's not responsible utilization of transit funding. So members, because this is a healthy account, we should not accept this amendment. Vote red.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just first want to speak to something that was said across the aisle about only investing in those things that people use the most. And just go back to what was said earlier about the diversity of this state. We don't just represent those who have one mode of transportation. We represent those people who have to get around by a lot of different modes. And we represent everyone across the state, and so we need to keep that in mind. And that's what this is trying to do, is to make sure that we are recognizing those people. So I urge the body to vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Hussein.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 65 ayes and 68 nays, the amendment does not pass. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 2438, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Washington, Representative Anderson, PE.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm on the Transportation Committee. I want to say there are several provisions that I supported that didn't make it in this bill, such as getting rid of the delivery fee, such as the train to Duluth, and some other things. But I understand why. This is something that's negotiated. It's even between the two bodies, and in the end, this is what we have. So it's not a perfect bill, but it's a bill that I'm going to support, and I ask members here to join me and also support this bill. It's an even bill, and it's a bill that I can live with. So I want to thank the staff, thank my fellow members, and ask for everyone's support. Thanks.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. So I obviously spoke a lot already. I'm not going to speak very much. I cannot support this bill. I think that it makes us less sustainable and less safe. And while we had an opportunity today, while President Trump is going in the wrong direction on transportation policy and climate policy, we had an opportunity to go much more strongly in a different direction, and this bill falls far short of what is needed, especially given that transportation greenhouse gas emissions are the #1 source in Minnesota and around the country. And as much as we would like to say, oh, let's pause things for 3.5 years, we can't pause climate change. And I'm disappointed that the EV amendment didn't pass. There's some other policies that are happening at the federal level that are really discouraging for EVs. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which was part of the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law passed by Congress, and NEVI included a $5 billion in formula funding. Minnesota received about $70 million. This was, I believe, illegally paused. And this is usurping the power of Congress. So we had a chance to provide some relief to EV folks that we did not do. Lastly, I'm disappointed about the cuts in transit of about $50 million when we have over $100 million of earmarks in this bill. I think that's the wrong priorities. So I would, with that, urge a no vote on the bill.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support. Again, in a divided House, you got some you like, some you don't. At this point, this is a bill that we all can agree to. It's not a perfect bill. I wish there were some more things in there, but there's not. I look forward to working someday with where we can get some change for transportation, but right now, the way it looks, we're going to be stuck in this. We're going to work together with what we have. Someday, we're going to figure out how to do transportation better, but for now, what we have, I'm in support of what we have, and I look forward to working with everyone again. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Right now we get to talk about the full budget bill for transportation, and this is funding for our transportation system. So the key word here is system. We need safe, reliable, and affordable ways to get around. And it's important to have context for the parts of that system. And I'm going to talk about a growing problem that we have in transportation, and then a portion of it that puts, and then why a portion of this bill puts that problem even more at risk. So as has been mentioned, Minnesota has the 4th largest road network out of any state in the country, despite being 12th in geographic size and 23rd in population. When I learned these statistics, I was shocked. So I have an engineering background, and believe me, I am pro-roads, I am pro-infrastructure. But this data speaks volumes. As the saying goes, if you're in a hole, you should probably stop digging. We need to build smart, and if we are to be able to maintain what we have. So there are 3 paths we can take. We can do nothing, and our infrastructure crumbles. Well, that's not really an option. We can tax more to cover it. I don't think that's really too much of an option either, but I do want to make one clarification to a comment that was made earlier. So user fees do not fully cover the costs of our roads. I'm going to say that again. User fees do not fully cover the cost of our roads. Significant federal funding, usually on a 1-to-4 ratio, is employed on large projects. And property taxes are used often to pay for our local roads. So the third option we have on this problem is to do other things, right? We can extend the life of our roads. Representative Cagle has some good ideas and provisions in this bill around resilient pavement, so that's one of them. We can also be more creative and secure multiple benefits around our public right-of-way structure. So I want to give an example of this one in my city. It's Milwaukee Avenue. It's in Seward, so it's unfortunately not in my district, but if you haven't been there, I highly recommend you take a little trip. because it is a 2-block road that a number of years ago, the road itself was taken out, the front yards were extended, and now there is a large path in the middle. There are still drivers, there are still people who own cars on those 2 blocks. There are alleyways that create access to those garages. But it's such a wonderful place to be. And in fact, the property values of the homes along those 2 blocks are twice the value of the similar homes in the surrounding area. So we know when we think differently about our right-of-ways, we can actually see value in them. And so the last part here about doing other things is allowing for offsets. And so we have a law that allows us to plan and think differently, and we just took a vote on that. You know, the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled law that passed in '23 and evolved in '24 is an important tool for that. Its initial motivation may have been climate, but this tool facilitates addressing more than just that. It helps us create more livability. And that Milwaukee Avenue, although that it is not a specific offset in that law, it provides us an example, a way of thinking differently. And it's about creating greater options. It's about being creative and planning differently. So the bill in front of us delays the GHG and VMT law that is already into effect, which is unfortunate because it's already causing our engineers and our planners to think differently, to think about our road network differently. We need a system that gets people to where they need to go, whether they drive or not. So I cannot vote for this bill that removes a crucial tool that will help us have a smarter, more sustainable system from both a financial and an environmental perspective. So I urge other folks to vote no on this bill.
I recognize the member from Otter Tail, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to talk about some of the successes I see in this bill. And I want to thank from both sides for having some great discussions throughout the year. Representative Jones mentioned it just slightly, but I think one of the biggest opportunities that we have for improving the economics for road building in the state of Minnesota are actually the resiliency bill. And the resiliency bill is something that I've been in the Transportation Committee for a couple years, and it's definitely something I see some real opportunities for us. It's a bipartisan bill. So I was at a roundabout in 2023 in Alexandria, and I was talking to a county engineer. He was actually worked for MnDOT for 10 years, and then he spent about 10 years working in private industry. And we talked about what we could do if we changed the way we build roads. And so he had done a project for Wright County, where he had looked at a road that was expected to be a 25-year road, and they made some adjustments in how they're going to build that road, and now it's a 50-year road. And he said the interesting thing about it is it's 1% more money to build that road. In committee, I asked questions like, well, if we can go to 50, can we also get to 70? And the answer is yes. And the answer is it's less than 1%. These are very good. This is a very good bill, co-authored by Representative Cagle, but very bipartisan support. An excellent bill that's going to make road building in Minnesota more economical. So that's one of the successes I see in this session. The other one, I had a bill that had to do with involuntary loss of consciousness or from a seizure. And if you're a victim of a seizure and it happens just one time, you're expected to be seizure-free for 4 years. And then after 4 years, because you had one episode, every 4 years after that, you're expected to go back and get a statement from a doctor. And so there was an understanding, and I have 5 kids, 3 of them have had seizures, and they're very, once they come to the conclusion of how it happened, they can finish up on those seizures. And with this now, those folks aren't expected to go back every 4 years under certain considerations. If they go 5 years without a seizure, now they're able to get a statement from the doctor and not have to repeat that every 4 years. If it's 10 years with multiple seizures, if they go 10 years, they can do the same thing. So it was a really good bill for us. It was actually brought to us by MnDOT and Public Safety, but it's a really good bill because, especially with involuntary loss of consciousness or seizures, that's not forever. And so we were really holding these people with a lot of added burden by having them come back and get that statement every 5 years. The last thing I'll talk a little bit about is I had a bridge in Otter Tail County that as of January of this year was taken out of commission. And it's a very important bridge. And so I've got to thank the people from the Transportation Committee for looking at that bridge in Otter Tail County so we could replace it. So anyway, I think this is a great bill, and I'm a yes vote. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to just say overall, it was a pleasure to serve on that committee. I think there was a great breakdown of Metro members, suburban members, and Greater Minnesota members. I want to thank both chairs for including my House File 795, which, as a father that'll have a driver here in a couple years, I think we're all looking for opportunities to make, those opportunities to get in for our young drivers a little bit easier and just getting into testing. I do want to thank Chair Kosnick and Chair Cagle for their work. I think if you guys look at this bill, it was mentioned earlier, there's a really good breakdown of Democrat bills, Republican bills, and I think that's what people are going to look at when they look at that, the final bill of this transportation. And so I'm just really appreciative of everybody that helped participate in that, and I hope everybody can vote green.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Berg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I want to thank Chair Cagle. I know how hard you worked on this bill and how hard you fought for a bill that would be good for workers, good for the environment, and good for the people of Minnesota. And that should always be our goal here, to craft legislation that does the most good for the most people, that protects our natural resources, that mitigates harm, and that ensures our working families have the opportunity to thrive. This bill doesn't do that. What this bill does do is perpetuate the tired and patently false narrative that it's either good jobs or a clean, healthy environment. But that's the point, right? That consolidates the money and the power within the fossil fuel industry, and the rich get richer, and our clean air and water suffers. Delaying the greenhouse gas emission legislation for 3.5 years is egregious, short-sighted, irresponsible, and the most frustrating part is it's completely unnecessary. This isn't some sort of win through wily negotiation skills. This is a mistake. It's a mistake that we are going to have to explain to our grandkids and great-grandkids when they can't go out and wiggle their toes in soft, fresh green grass or cool, clear water on a hot day. We're going to have to explain it when our grandchildren can't take in big gulps of clean air as they experience the pure joy of running so fast that your feet barely touch the ground. If you can't see this mistake from a policy perspective, understand that sooner than we think, fishing with granddad, gardening with grandma, camping, hiking, canoeing, swimming in our many lakes, even breathing will be limited and eventually compromised. And so you can snicker, but the simple truth is that none of us will escape the consequences of not taking action to mitigate the effects of climate change. We are not wealthy enough, powerful enough, or special enough. We will all suffer, and so will the people we love. We were elected to come here to make responsible decisions for the people of Minnesota. We are here to make change that makes sense. We are here to improve the lives of workers, our environment, our infrastructure, and our communities. Without Representative Kraft's amendment, this bill does not achieve that. Minnesota has been a leader in passing policies that protect our environment and that mitigate the effects of climate change in our state, and we must continue that work. Holding more than one truth at the same time isn't hard. We can continue to create family-sustaining wage jobs, improve the safety and sustainability of our infrastructure, and protect our clean air and water. Hundreds of workers in Minnesota rely on us to pass a transportation bill that ensures they have work. They and all of us deserve better than this. It is important to note that labor is not on these letters that Representative Kosnick passed around. Labor is not on here. And I am one of those first-time committee members that Co-Chair Kosnick mentioned in his remark. And I expected us to do better than this. How we lead in this moment matters. What we do in this moment to make responsible decisions for our generations to come matters. Members, vote no. We can and must do better than this.
I recognize the member from Nobles, Representative Fogelman.
Thank you, Speaker. I just wanted to say thank you to Chair Kosnick for working so hard on this bill and always giving me great direction on certain bills that I got to present this year. I always enjoy working on the Transportation Committee. I think it's one of the most important things that we do here in the government, and I think this is a great bill, and I encourage a yes vote.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, but Hennepin is the county that I'm from.
My apologies, Representative.
No
Hennepin.
worries, thank you, and always appreciate my friends on the other side of the river. Wanna start by saying, thank you, Chair Kosnick, for the Taylor Swift quote earlier. I think you spoke about Taylor Swift singing about unhealthy, dysfunctional, potentially abusive relationships, which is something she talks about a lot. I think it's really apt for this bill about transportation, because I would say that we have an unhealthy, dysfunctional, and I think you could make an argument potentially abusive relationship with our cars and with our highways. I come to transportation. We have engineers on the committee. We have people who are experts. I don't come from that background. I come as a person who cares about climate change, cares about a future Earth for future generations, for my kids, and when I look at climate change, I think about all the different things that we can do. And when I came into the legislature, I started looking at energy policy, and I was like, wow, that is really confusing. There's a lot of moving pieces there. And then I looked at transportation, and to me, the answer in transportation is a lot simpler. We need to have different fuel, and we need to drive less. And the fuel part is still very confusing to me. Thank you, Chair Cagle, for all your work in that. But the driving less is simple. And in 2023, we made great strides in helping people and helping our system help people to drive less. And I'm really concerned that this bill in front of us today, without Representative Kraft's amendment, is going to roll that back. Greenhouse gas is the #1 source of emissions. That is the #1 fact that we all need to think about when we are thinking about what should our transportation system do. So our system now needs to help us drive less, which is a really big change for our system, and especially when we talk about highways. Highways were designed to get people in and out of often urban, people of color communities as fast as possible. And now we are trying, and I want to, credit all of the activists, all the community members who have come to us again and again and talked about the devastation that their communities have felt from highways. They are asking us to think differently, to design highways to think differently. And those of us who have highways in our communities, who are trying to roll back some of that devastation, we know how hard it is to get that system to think differently. And so Representative Kraft, with his legislation, and others, we found a way, right? We said that we need to stick to our word. MnDOT needs to stick to its goal of reducing vehicle mile traveled. And the way we do that is partly in the mitigation, but it's partly just in asking our system to think differently and to not be hyper-focused on highway expansion, which is what the system will tilt towards if we do not put in measures to stop it. And so now we are thinking about rolling that back. And we can talk about it from a climate perspective, and I know other people have spoken today about from an economic perspective. We're having lots of conversations with the legislature right now about unrestrained growth, unsustainable growth. We're talking about that in places like human services, where we're saying some of these services that our most vulnerable community members are getting, the costs are rising, they're unsustainable, we need to rein it in. The place that we need to rein it in is our roads. We have the 4th largest highway and road system in the US. I think any of us, you don't need to be a transportation expert to understand, that doesn't make sense. We don't have the 4th highest population. We don't have the 4th highest geographic area. We have a system that just keeps building and expanding, and Minnesota taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it unless we try to get the system to think differently. So again, I cannot support this bill as is. Thank you, Chair Koznick. I know that you included my proposal for traffic calming, which is something that my residents have been reaching out, talking a lot about, particularly coming out of the pandemic. I know that in my community and across the state, there are lots of concerns about the way people are driving. When we're thinking about public safety, one of the main concerns that I hear in my neighborhood about public safety is that people don't feel safe letting their kids go outside because of the way people are driving. And so I certainly care about that. I appreciate the funding, but traffic calming and traffic calming measures are a Band-Aid when we really need to be thinking about how to build the system, how to build our streets out safer. And so I cannot support this bill today as is, and I would encourage all members to vote no on this bill. If you are for people living healthier lives, if you are for checking unsustained growth that we cannot afford, and if you are for a future that we can be proud of, please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to thank the chairs, Representative Cagle and Representative Koznick, for the transportation bill. And while it's not the bill that probably either side of the aisle would want 100%, I think that it is a true bipartisan bill. And I want to say thank you for the Duluth Airport Tower. That international Duluth Airport Tower is 70 years old. It is, I think, the third oldest tower in the nation. And we will be able to get federal funding that is really critical for that entire region. And I think it was important timing. Last year, a gas tax happened with an inflator for inflation. And I think we were forced to really, truly look at the EV, fairness funding for roads. And I believe that this is a pathway forward to that, to make sure that our roads and bridges have funding. 40% of the roads are maintained where I live by townships. And we have a lot of roadway in northern Minnesota, just like we do highways and busier systems down here that have to be maintained. And I think this gives us a model to move forward. So thank you to members across the aisle. I think it is, I think it's a good bill. And thank you to the co-chairs. I urge you to vote green.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Ream.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to the chairs, especially Chair Cagle, for putting in the hours to work out this deal. I know it was a really tough negotiation, and there's a lot of difficulty coming to this agreement. So I appreciate that. I also want to say a thank you to Representative Tabke, who also put in a lot of time and effort to get some of the provisions that I hold dear, things like funding Metro Mobility. We were able to fund Metro Mobility. I think that's a really important provision we have in there. My e-bike rebate reform is also in this bill. And we have some funding for traffic safety initiatives. The e-bike rebate reform bill is, I think, going to be a lot better now. We're going from first come, first served to a lottery. And instead of 40% of the eligible recipients being lower income, it will be 100% of the grants will go toward, or the rebates will go toward people who, if they're married, it's married eligible individuals who filed a joint return whose adjusted gross income was no more than $78,000 will be eligible, and $41,000 for all other individuals. So I think that's a really good step forward, an improvement on the bill that we had passed previously. Transit service for certified disabled riders will now be free of charge for the 7-county area. I think that's a good thing, and we can celebrate that. I also want to acknowledge the work of Representative Andrew Myers, who has been working on the helmet mandate. And I will say that in 2024, we actually did pass a bill to have a study. In the 2024 Transportation, Housing, and Labor Omnibus Budget Bill, there was a study requested on youth e-bike safety. And that study, which is in process right now, will address and analyze the following topics: identify challenges to the safe operation of electric-assisted bicycles by those under the age of 18, evaluate existing legal authority for strategies, practices, and methods to reduce the availability of modifications to the electric motor of electric-assisted bicycles, make recommendations on whether to change state law to improve electric-assisted bicycle safety on roads, trails, and other areas where safe operation of electric-assisted bicycles is needed, and propose educational and public awareness campaigns to educate the public about electric-assisted bicycles, promote their safe operation, and raise awareness of their unique characteristics when operating on roadways. So I'm in favor of people wearing helmets when they're out biking. I think most of us are, if not all of us. But I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this study, and then hopefully we can work together to create a really good bill for helmets. As for the disappointments that I've seen in this bill, I have a few. I wish we would have had more funding for traffic safety initiatives. I wasn't able to have my bill presented. We didn't have a lot of time. We only had one committee hearing, and that was unfortunate. We did not get any funding for high-risk rural highways. I think to many of us, especially those of us who travel outstate, where most of the traffic fatalities occur, it's really important that we're funding improvements to our roads, so that we're not running into dangerous situations on the roads outstate. Safe, sober driving grants, that did not make it into the bill. Work zone safety grants did not make it into the bill. The Advisory Council on Traffic Safety, which I had carried last session, the funding for that, we got some funding, but not a lot. And I think we've talked about this, but the most dangerous thing we do every day, most of us at least, is get in a car and drive. I really think it's important that we prioritize traffic safety as we move forward. And I'm hoping when this bill goes into conference that this bill will be improved. I don't think we should go back on our policy that we won, nation-leading policy on greenhouse gas reduction. That was an important win. This is known throughout the country as a place that had a huge climate win last biennium. I don't like the idea of going back. We can't afford to wait. We can't afford to put a pause on this. And to highlight that, today I got a postcard. A very simple postcard. I'm not sure who it was who sent it to me. His name is here, but I haven't contacted him yet. But he said, "Dear Representative Lucy Ream, I am reaching out due to the public ice rinks and how the warm winters are really shortening the outdoor ice time. If there is a way to fix this, please help us out." And I thought about when I was growing up, winters were guaranteed. I had, at the end of my block, we had a pond, and every winter I knew that pond would freeze. I could go out there with family and friends, we could go skating. And now with my kids, when we would try to go skating this past winter, you never know if the rinks are gonna be frozen in December. Our winters have shortened, and our summers have lengthened, and winter sports are not the way they used to be years ago. And so I think we really need to be paying attention to the weather, because it's telling us something. Climate change is real, and we can't go back. We can't go back. So I do hope that is this working? Thank you. I hope that the bill improves as it hits the conference committee. I'm looking forward to seeing a multimodal, safe, and efficient transportation bill when it comes back to us. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is my first term in the legislature, not on the Transportation Committee. I apologize, Chair Koznick and Chair Cagle. I know you missed me so very much. But we've talked a lot about we have the 4th largest road network in the country. And why? Why do we have the 4th largest road network in the country? Because Minnesota doesn't just feed the country, it feeds the world. And we take up a lot of space with our farms. And user fees, sure, they don't cover the entire cost of our road network. They make it so those who use the most pay more, but everyone benefits from our robust road network, whether it's feeding your family, getting to work, getting products to the store of which you walk in your commune to go buy. Doesn't matter if you don't have a car, you still benefit from the roads. And when we talk about we should use less roads. And it's like, yes, I would love if I could just walk to the grocery store, walk back to the grocery store, have them grow their food in the back of the grocery store so I can just go get it. That would be absolutely fantastic, but that's not the world we live in. Minnesota is like 1.7% of the population of the United States, 0.0000007% of the population of the entire world. And when we want to address, you've heard a lot of apocalypse fantasy, when we want to address the problem of climate change, we're not going to do it with that tiny slice of the world. It's other countries, in fact, President Trump's tariffs are probably going to do a lot to fight climate change, considering what China generates their power from. But when we're looking at these greenhouse gas emission issues, and this bill helps us with those, if you need a road project, if you aren't somebody who lives in Minneapolis, you need your car. You need to be able to travel. And what we're seeing is our road network is not ready for the task, especially in the outer metro where Blaine is. And that's why I care so much about Highway 65. But in Blaine, in Shakopee, in Chanhassen, we need our roads to be improved. We need to be able to move, not just to do superfluous activities, but that is economic activity. That is how we get our people to work, how you get yourself to work, how you provide for your family, how you acquire food. This road network where we're saying we should travel less, that is a simplistic vision. So I, like Elon Musk, believe climate change is an issue that we should address. But we are certainly not going to address it in the manner that is being proposed by the other side. And I want to thank so much of the thoughtful approach from Chair Cagle and Chair Kosnick that we're going to think this through. We're going to take it one step at a time, because economic activity and success gives us the ability to address these environmental issues. You do not see countries that burn wood to heat their homes caring about environmental issues. That is incredibly polluting, burning wood. But thanks to advances in technology, from electric vehicles to fracking, we have been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our country. We have. Just in the last year, 3%. We've done it consistently before that. So we should be encouraging economic activity, encouraging investing in new technologies, because that is the path out of here. If we're just going to put government roadblocks in the path of economic success, we're genuinely going to make the situation worse. So I want to thank the transportation chairs for this terrific bill that has bipartisan support. I've heard bipartisan support within my community from all sides of the spectrum, because it invests in roads and bridges, which we like over here, and it takes seriously the climate risks on the other side of the aisle without sacrificing unnecessarily. So thank you, Chair Kosnick. Thank you, Chair Cagle. I am excited to vote for this bill.
I recognize the member from Martin, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The purpose of a transportation bill is to talk about and fund all aspects of transportation. That's what we do with this bill. You know, some individuals may look at it and say, well, it redirects too much funding away from one thing or another. We've got very healthy transit accounts. With this 0.75% sales tax in the metro, the transit account is looking really healthy. The rural transit account is looking healthy. We're building roads better. We are building in ways that we are connecting avenues, corridors of commerce. We're helping to drive the economy of our state through the production of this bill. We're funding trains, planes, automobiles, and buses. That's what we are supposed to do. That's what a transportation bill does. And so even though I didn't get everything I wanted, Chair Kosnick, Chair Cagle, we didn't get what we wanted. We didn't get all of it, but that's the game that we're playing here in a tied House. And I think that at the end of the day, the rudimental judge of whether or not this is a decent bill that you can vote for is, does this bill fund transportation? Because it is, in fact, a transportation bill. And that is why I will be voting for this bill today. We're funding our planes, our trains, our automobiles, and our buses in this bill. And we're even talking about electronic bicycles as well. So you can add that one to the mix as well. So the only thing we're not buying are shoes for your feet, because that's walking. All right, this is an okay bill. You should be okay to vote for it. I encourage you to vote green on this bill.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first off, I just really want to thank the staff. Matt Burris and Andy Lee, this place would fall apart without you wherever you are. I appreciate you so much. You guys have no idea. My DFL staff, Matt Bauman and Kyle Schwab, who are kind of my think tank. And then I have my LA Alex Wheeler, who just points me in the right direction, quite literally. And as well as my intern, George Coral from McAllister. So he's been a real big help on the committee this year. And so I always try and think about these things ahead of time and how I'm going to talk about it. And, I kind of thought back to how we demonstrate our duty as public servants. And we demonstrate our duty as public servants not only by the words we say, but the authenticity of our deeds. And we must realize that we need to build a vision for the state of Minnesota where everyone is included, instead of purposefully excluding certain people, the most vulnerable and the marginalized. You know, the verse, I truly, I tell you, wherever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me, always comes to mind whenever I'm working here. It's something that is probably one of the core values of mine. And so in 2023, we had one of the most transformational transportation budgets, I think, ever, maybe at least since I've been here. And together we were able to set forth a vision of our state that included everyone. Chair Hornstein was able to ensure that we thought about all Minnesotans, including the most vulnerable, by making improvements in all parts of the state for all modes of transportation. We not only thought about how people are connected, but also our future, to ensure that we have clean air for our children and grandchildren. In Minnesota, the transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, about 1/4 of the state's total emissions. So to my colleagues, I apologize that I agreed to take the greenhouse gas emissions legislation. I'm also sorry to the people who rely on transit about the cuts that we had to make. Let's use the word that it is. They're cuts to transportation and transit. I think that this bill is not quite as balanced as we'd like to think, because I think a lot of it is in the past and not looking towards the future. So Minnesotans can do hard things. We're smart, and we know that land use is going to be the way that we get people outside, walking, biking, living more healthier lives, and making sure that our future is one that we can be proud of, that we don't have to apologize to our children for the planet we left them. And like I said earlier, I take my duty as a public servant very seriously, and I will be voting in favor of this transportation bill to ensure that we will fund our state government. But I will continue to do my duty as a public servant to ensure that we fund our state government, but continue to fight for a future where all of our children can live. Thank you.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Kosnick.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and members. I appreciate the discussion and the debate and the sharing of ideas today, and that's how we arrived at the bill that we've got in front of us. A bill that is balanced, a bill that makes our transportation system smarter, that makes our transportation system safer, and even makes our transportation system more sustainable. This is a bill that prioritizes the types of transportation Minnesotans use most and reinvests in our roads, bridges, and all modes of transportation to drive economic development across the state and allow Minnesotans to live better lives. It is a system for walkers, and in this bill we have provisions for walkers, bikers, riders, drivers, and flyers. We've said a lot about the bill, and there's a lot more that we could continue to talk about. There's some important provisions. There were earmarks versus transit comment that was discussed. But those of you that are listening, you need to understand that there are different pots of money within transportation, and you can't use trunk highway funds for buses. What we did do is invest in projects that are ready to go, that it will not be sitting on the sidelines in a planner or engineer's office. But we funded, if you look on page 12 of the spreadsheet, a number of projects that we took the burden off of the Capital Investment Project Committee. The Rum River Dam Pedestrian Bridge, Old Highway 10 in Arden Hills, traffic calming in Minneapolis. We talked about the bridge in Otter Tail County, the damaged bridge in Rogers and on Main Street in Rogers. I think it was Maple Grove and then Main Street in Rogers. The city of St. Cloud is getting some funding for a needed repair on 322nd Street. The city of Shakopee will be getting some funding for railroad quiet zones. Stillwater, many of us enjoy going to Stillwater as a tourist town. Myrtle Street, very well-known street, will get the repairs that they need on a very challenging road. Up in Crookston, Minnesota, in their downtown, US Highway 2 will receive some important improvements, and that is a provision of Chair Cagle. And then also 610 and East River Road, the interchange in Coon Rapids, among others. We've taken $100 million of reallocating funds so that the bonding committee can address other critical needs of the state. And that's something we can all support and be very proud of. There are a number of other provisions in the bill that we didn't talk about, and you might be interested to know that Capitol security, the ladies and gentlemen that protect us in this building and protect the assets around the Capitol, are funded in transportation, as well as our state patrols. They are receiving, obviously, money to patrol our highways, but also some retention and recruitment dollars, and we are funding another trooper academy. Now, while we could have done and tried to do more, but through negotiations, you don't fund everything and get everything that you want, but we didn't fully make the reductions in transit that the governor's office has recommended. And the reason that they recommended some of those reductions were because of the new sales tax, $700 million going into our transit system through a local sales tax. That's a lot of money, but it's not reflected in here. But you have to understand that there are additional revenue streams that are going to some important projects and modes of transportation that those across the aisle hold apparently quite dear. And so do we. But just because it's not in this particular reflected on the spreadsheet, you should know that there's $700 million in new local sales taxes. And I mentioned before, $100 million in regional transit bonds to maintain our system, on top of $500 million, nearly $500 million in reserves in our transit systems. So if you think there's cuts in transit, you're mistaken and you haven't done your homework. But what we did in this bill is the fiscally conservative approach that Minnesotans can be proud of maintaining our transportation system, maintaining our roads and bridges, our local wetlands, our local roads and bridges, our county roads, and the state road construction programs. We also should re-mention, and it was briefly mentioned, but those that are eligible for Metro Mobility are going to be able to get free rides on the regular route service if that provides a needed service for them, and we hope that that will save us some additional funds. And so that's going to be a new program that gets started. Representative Kraft had a nice program that when you go on the benefits portal website, there will be a link now, if you're eligible, to get free or reduced rides on regular transit rides. I thank you for that provision, but those people have not been forgotten. On page 47 in line 47.7 and 47.8 of the bill, a lot of talk about the greenhouse gas implementation date changes. It simply changes on line 47.7, strikes out 2027, and inserts 2028. The sky is not going to fall by making that change, but it will help make sure that our mitigation offsets are hopefully done better and buy us a little bit of time for those that do build our roads, the workers that build our roads. This is House File 2438 is a balanced bill that makes our entire transportation system safer, smarter, and more sustainable. Minnesotans deserve a system that keeps them moving safely, efficiently, and a system that supports economic activity, protects taxpayers, and a system that invests in the modes of transportation that Minnesotans use most: walkers, bikers, riders, drivers, and flyers. This is a bill that keeps all Minnesotans moving safer, smarter, and more sustainably. Members, you can be proud to vote for this bill. I would appreciate a support for this bill and a green vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Hussein.
Hussein, no.
Hussein votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 85 ayes and 49 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title is agreed to.